Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root, where we dive deep into understanding and addressing root causes of chronic health issues so you can help and find healing inside and out, now and forever. Hello and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root. I'm Megan Abbott, owner and founder of the holistic health practice at Trifecta Collective. Welcome to the podcast. So today I want to do another episode about peeling back the layers of a handful of symptoms here or diagnoses that we see a lot of, especially within our practice. But I also know just in particular, so many women struggle with so many of these. So the three I'm going to talk about today are thyroid issues, and I'm coupling all of these together. So whether it's hypo, hyper, everything's trending low, everything's trending high, and or autoimmune, whether that's Hashimoto's or Graves. So I'm gonna kind of loop all of this together because there's a lot of very, very, very similar root causes to all of those. So I'm going to do the thyroid. I'm also going to touch on bloating, and I'm going to be quick about the bloating because bloating and constipation, there's a lot of overlap. But there's a couple specifics I really want to dive into specific to bloating. And then I'm also going to, this one I'm going to almost do the opposite of the thyroid. I'm going to call it PCOS. I'm going to dive into PCOS. And once again, there's a lot of overlap. PCOS, endometriosis, PMDD, any sort of hormonal imbalance, hormonal type issues is really what I'm digging into, and I'm going to use PCOS as the main example. And once again, there's going to be so much carryover for other types of hormonal imbalances that are going on. So that is my hope today, to get through all three of those. And once again, I'm going to keep the bloating on the shorter side because if you didn't listen to the previous episode about this that came out just I think 2 weeks ago, be sure to go listen to that because constipation, once again, constipation and bloating, there can be a lot of overlap when it comes to that, but there are some distinct differences and some different things to think about when it comes to that. So let's talk about the thyroid here first. So women are more prone to thyroid issues for reference, and I do think there is a very specific reason for that. And there is science to back, at least in part. There's not a ton of research around this, but there is some decent research around this that I will share. So when we think about the thyroid, I'm going to start on the physical and then kind of work my way back. The other thing I'll say is the thyroid is impacted by so many things systemically in the body. The thyroid is so small and so tiny. And if you're not familiar where the thyroid is, and I keep touching my own thyroid, so it's in your neck, essentially. And it's in the front part of your neck. And some people, when they experience some thyroid issues, actually notice swelling, and they can actually feel swelling especially in the front part of their neck. Sometimes it'll come up a little bit just to the sides, not like where your glands are, like your lymph nodes, glands that get swollen when you're sick. It's not that. It's going to be a little bit more towards the front of your neck. And especially if you have nodules, some people can actually feel the nodules, especially if they have a little flare up, they'll be able to feel that. So just for reference on that. So the thyroid, where I was going with this, backtracking, this is the first thing I'm doing in the morning. So my brain isn't 100% on right now. So if you want to dive deeper into a lot of these specifics, really hardcore science, statistics, specific thyroid support, we did an episode on thyroid healing a while back. It was a pretty early episode and it was very science heavy. We try to keep it in as plain language as we absolutely could, and it is pretty science heavy. So if you're looking at specific patterns and really to dive deep, go listen to that episode. But I'm going to touch on, once again, peeling back the layers of the thyroid and all of the things that impact the thyroid. So the thyroid is a very sensitive organ. It is impacted by a lot of things. Nutrients is a really big one. And two big nutrients that we often think about when it comes to the thyroid that are almost never, ever looked at when it comes to blood work are iodine and selenium. And there was a craze a little while ago. I'm not seeing it still, and it might still be going on, but a really big flood of people saying that if you feel fatigue, if you have struggle to lose weight, you might need iodine, in which case supplement with sea moss. And it was a big selling point of sea moss, and there was a handful of mostly multi-level marketing, for reference, supplement companies that were really pushing sea moss. And I got asked a lot, and we as a practice got asked a lot of questions about this. And yeah, it's super important to look at this. It is hard to get enough iodine for many people, especially if you're not supplementing with a quality multivitamin. And if you don't eat any seafood, oftentimes we're getting a lot of not, and this is not exclusive to seafood, and there tends to be more iodine in seafood, especially a lot of like seaweed, the sea mosses, kelp, different things like that tend to be a little bit higher in iodine. There is some iodine, and I have not looked at this very recently, in beef. Beef and organs there's just about every single nutrient in red meat. Red meat is one of the most nutrient-dense things you can eat. I understand some people don't do well with it, and that can be from an ethical and moral standpoint. That can also be from a digestion standpoint, in which case we definitely need to look at the digestive piece of this. Lyme disease can also cause aversions to red meat, just for reference. Also, not saying everyone with an aversion to red meat has Lyme disease. So these two nutrients are often impacted. Often the thyroid's going to feel those nutrient deficiencies significantly. And that's going to be one of the first places that can often show up that we have some of these nutrient deficiencies. And once again, almost no one tests for these things. If you look at something like a hair tissue mineral analysis or an HTMA, this can be a good way to take a deeper look at the thyroid and all of the nutrients that impact the thyroid. We also get some heavy metal markers. However, there's a nuance to reading heavy metals when it comes to HTMA. It's not as obvious as you would think, and you need to compare an HTMA with blood work to get the most accurate result, especially if you're looking at the heavy metal side of things. So we have these nutrient deficiencies. We can also just throw in here stress, blanket stress really impacts the thyroid. I mean, significantly. And I'll tell you, this can result in hyper or hypothyroidism. However, a lot of times when we see a lot of stress in someone's body, more commonly what we'll see is starting to see trends of lowered TSH, especially like lower than 1.5, getting into like somewhere between 1 to 1.5 or even below that. We're also going to see lowered free T4. So make sure you get free T4 run. We're going to see that closer to like 1, 1.1, just under 1. And we're also going to see lowered free T3. So we'll usually see that 3 or under. It's usually going to be under 2.6, 2.8. Or under. And those are standard American units for reference. The reference range for international units is a little bit different. If you're curious as to what those are, I do not have them in front of me, and I have a really lovely cheat sheet when it comes to international markers because we work with a ton of international clients. So always feel free to reach out to us if you're interested in some of the more specific lab ranges that we use for international ranges on anything, including the thyroid. So we're going to see oftentimes that all three of those lowered when it comes to really significant and chronic stress. Toxin load also plays a really big role here when it comes to the thyroid. And this is across the board. This is heavy metals, mold, and or environmental toxins. But the thyroid really responds poorly to stressors. And once again, when we look at stressors, we look big picture stressors. Toxin load's a really big one, and that can play a really big role. Our gut health can play a really big role in our thyroid. And here are two really big reasons as to why these two organs, or we say these two systems, play such a big role. So when we look at the liver, we look at drainage pathways just kind of overall. So in our thyroid, so I think an important reference here when it comes to the thyroid, and I'm trying to decide as I'm going through this how in detail I'm going to go. So TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, is actually produced in our brain. It's not a thyroid hormone. It's actually a chemical that is stimulated from our brain and then sent to our thyroid. So I think that's an important reference. If you only have an issue with TSH, it might be worthwhile to start at the brain, the hypothalamus, and the pituitary. Usually that's where we want to look. And if everything else looks fine and optimal, and by fine, I do mean optimal, then we want to look at the brain. What's going on with the brain? The adrenals play a big role here. We have the HPA, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, hypothalamus pituitary thyroid axis. So hypothalamus and pituitary, if we've got some stuff going on in our brain that is oftentimes related to stress, chronic stress, and that can be from a big picture stress here that I talk about all of the time, we need to look at the brain and what's going on with that. More often than not, it is the pituitary that we need to take a deeper look at versus the hypothalamus, but both can play a role here. And then we have T4. T4 is produced in our actual thyroid. However, it is not something our body actually uses. It has to be converted to something else for our body to be able to use that. And the active form of the hormone that we can actually use is T3. And if you go to most standard Western medicine doctors, they're not going to look at T3. And it's just not something that they look at. And it has to do with how Western medicine looks at the thyroid and thyroid issues. And once again, go listen to our thyroid episode if you're interested in digging in deeper into that. And we talk about that and the patterns of that primary hypothyroidism versus secondary hypothyroidism. And there's a lot of pieces that go into that. More of the story here, where I'm going with this. So we have this T4 that's produced in our thyroid. Our actual thyroid only produces about 20% of the T3. The rest has to be converted from this T4. About 60% of that conversion from T4 to T3 happens in our liver. If we've got drainage pathway issues, if we are chronically constipated, if we've got all kinds of blood sugar dysregulation issues, if we have no gallbladder, if we've got any sort of toxin overload issues, chronic viral issues, like any of these things are going to impact the liver, which then can impact the thyroid, especially when it comes to energy levels. This is a really, really, really big one because that T3 plays a big role in our metabolism and our energy, even our cognitive function. It also plays a role in the rest of our hormone health, stress hormones and sex hormones. So that's really important to understand, especially as women. This thyroid is super, super, super important. And it is impacted by so many things that if you only look at the thyroid, oh my goodness, are you doing yourself a massive, massive disservice? And this is where I often see people get on thyroid medication and then cannot get off if that is what they are looking to do. I'm not saying thyroid medication is bad. Do what you need to do. It was offered to me when I was first diagnosed with hypothyroidism. And then again, when I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's. It was offered to me and I didn't feel right taking it. And that was a very personal decision for me. And there's no shame to anyone who takes thyroid meds. I'll often say, too, if you choose to be on thyroid meds, if you're on it for more than a couple months, I'd say more than 3 months, the likelihood that we're going to be able to wean you off of it successfully, even with bigger, deeper work, that probability goes down pretty drastically. Our thyroids, and it also depends on what form of medication you're taking. Most people get put on synthetic T4, levothyroxine, Synthroid. Most people are not given T3. Now, if you're given T3, different story here, usually easier to wean off of that. If you're given something like NP thyroid armor, your odds go up from a synthetic T4, and it can still be a little wishy-washy. So much of this conversion is done in our liver. Another 20% of it is done in our gut. Once again, if we have any sort of gut issues, constipation, loose stool, any sort of gut overgrowth issues, a bunch of food sensitivity issues, a bunch of immune system issues, because most of our immune system is housed in our gut, like 70% is housed in our gut. We've got chronic immune system issues. I'm going to touch on that too here in just a moment. The likelihood that our thyroid is going to be impacted is pretty high. So those are all things to really think about when it comes to the thyroid from an inside perspective. Going back into the immune system, and there is a very strong correlation to chronic viral issues, especially Epstein-Barr virus. And we know now pretty confidently that the virus that came out, and if I do say it, I'm going to try not to say it and it might slip out because there's still some algorithm issues when it comes to saying this word. The virus that came out in 2020 and the subsequent prevention of it, extrapolate the words that I'm trying not to say here, both of those are now shown to trigger reactivated EBV, reactivated Epstein-Barr virus. We know also that chronic Epstein-Barr virus can trigger thyroid issues, particularly hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's. Now, that's not to say that hyperthyroidism and or Graves can't play a role, because I have seen it, and it's just not quite as common. So that's something to really kind of think about. Also keep in mind, and we did an episode on chronic viral issues. If we look at chronic viral issues, and we're actually seeing a few cases around this of individuals coming to us with chronic EBV and wanting direct support for EBV, which, yes, sometimes we need immune system support and viral support. More often than not, we need to look at what is actually triggering the immune system. What else is the immune system busy dealing with that it can't keep these viruses that the vast majority, I'm talking over 90% of the population, has within our bodies. And most people have zero symptoms, and it stays dormant in our body and just hangs out there, and it is not a big deal, except when our immune system gets busy doing other things. And once again, this was me. I had chronic viral issues, Epstein-Barr virus. I also had cytomegalovirus. You know, those were the two big ones that I was tested for. I also don't think it's super worthwhile to test for all of the viral issues out there, because if we peel back those layers, we're coming back to the same place. So that can play a big role. And when it comes to the immune system, we need to look, once again, I think toxin load, I think chronic stressors, the gut, especially parasite overgrowth issues, man, does that play a big role. I'll also say that if you have mold, you're going to have a parasite issue. The likelihood that you're going to have immune system dysfunction issues across the board, and that can result in chronic viral issues, is very high. If you've been dealing with chronic EBV for a significant period of time and you've done like all of the protocols to try and help and support your body and it's not working, and you keep getting these flares more than every few years, I would say, even still, that's a little hit or miss. But if you're getting multiple flares, especially a year, please look at mold. That is the most common reason that most people don't know how to look at or address appropriately. So that can play a really big role here. So all of those things can impact our thyroid. Also, if we have nutrient deficiencies, the question is, why do we have nutrient deficiencies? What's going on? Is it an intake issue, meaning we're not ingesting those nutrients, or is it a digestion issue, meaning that we're not being able to properly break down our food, whether that's a stomach acid issue, pancreatic enzymes, liver with the bile, gallbladder, bile flow, releasing the bile into our body to break down the fat. We need to look at all of these things. Another big thing we really need to look at is chronic stress. And I'm talking living in a state of chronic stress. That might be in a trauma state. That might be a fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. If you've got cortisol issues, you probably have thyroid issues, because once again, those two organs share the same pieces of our brain. Hypothalamus and the pituitary play a big role in the downstream impact of both of those in both our adrenals, our adrenal health, and our thyroid health. So we absolutely need to look at cortisol and what is going on. What is stressing out our body? Are we sleeping? Are we working out too much? Are we eating enough? Are we eating too much? Are we not eating enough of the right things? What is going on in our world? Work stress, life stress, family stress, all the stress. We need to look at all of those things. The other thing that I actually cannot think of a case where I haven't seen someone with thyroid issues where this isn't also an issue, When we think about, because the thyroid is located in our throat, and if we think about more of the emotional and energetic bodies, and once again, there is science to back some of this up. I'm going to go with the non-science side first, and then I'll get into the science side. Because it's located in our throat, we think about the throat chakra. The throat chakra has a lot to do with our external, verbal, outward expression. If you have people-pleasing patterns, if you swallow a lot of your words, your thoughts, your emotions, and shove them down, whether that results in people-pleasing, which it often does, or not, the likelihood that you're going to have thyroid issues at some point is astronomically high. And I will tell you, you can do all the supplements, all of the internal body work, all of the things. And until you also address this piece and learn how to stop people pleasing and start to speak up for yourself. And there are appropriate ways to do this. This doesn't mean you're mean, doesn't mean you're rude. There are ways to do this. Set boundaries appropriately, uphold those boundaries, and speak your truth. And this, man, do most of us women have a hard time with this. Once again, it is, I cannot actively, and I'm talking hundreds of cases here where I've seen this, and it's always playing a role. And it's not something that everyone wants to look at. And some people stop working with us sometimes because they don't want to look at that side of things, and they just want more supplements, they want more protocols, they want more things. But this plays a really big role. If you're not speaking up for yourself, if you're not speaking your truth, if you're not speaking up for when you feel hurt, when you feel disappointed, when you feel attacked, when you just don't, when you're not sticking up for yourself. And once again, there are healthy ways to communicate this. It doesn't mean you're rude, or it doesn't mean you're snapping at people. It doesn't mean any of these things. It's going to impact your thyroid 100%. This also often comes up in perimenopause. And there is, they call it like the perimenopausal snap, or why do so many women end up getting divorced when they're in perimenopause? Well, I think there's a lot of reasons for it. I think one of those reasons can be women get tired of feeling like a second-class citizen and doing everything, especially if they're in a heterosexual relationship, of doing all of the work and doing all of the things and being so freaking burnt out that they snap. Literally, just they snap, and I'm not doing this. I'm not handling this anymore. I'm not micromanaging you, plus working, plus caring for the kids, plus managing all of the finances, plus doing all of the cooking and the cleaning and all of the, like, no one person is meant to do all of that. It's a lot, especially when it's for multiple people. I mean, if you're doing it for yourself, that's a little bit of a different thing. But if you're doing it in a relationship with someone else, let alone doing it for a family, my goodness, is that such a massive, massive stressor. And, huge shout out to any kind of single parent where you are doing all of that. My goodness, like it's a lot. And the likelihood that you may experience at some point chronic health issues, yeah, is pretty high. So something to think about when it comes to that. Now, the science, where the science comes in, is there is good science that shows individuals who experience high levels of trauma, especially as children. The most common is, and the most research has been done around childhood trauma and adulthood autoimmune issues, and even thyroid issues. There is science very specific to thyroid issues, but there is, autoimmunity. Women are also 80% more likely to develop an autoimmune disease, blanket statement. And once again, like that is from studies that we have that information. So if you've had a long history of trauma, and we can extrapolate from, obviously, from childhood, yes, that plays a really big deal. We know that inflammation lasts longer term, decades after, even after, decades, even after, my goodness, even decades after you've experienced that trauma, inflammation levels tend to be higher in individuals who experience high levels of childhood trauma. And I'm not talking like you had to be beaten, or, you had to be homeless, unhoused. different things like that. If you score 2 or higher on the adverse childhood experiences, meaning that maybe you just didn't feel loved, maybe you didn't feel like you belonged, maybe you didn't feel like you got what you needed as a child, that's enough. That's enough trauma to push you into this category here, where you could be experiencing the side effects decades after the fact. And for many women, once again, I put myself into this category, that can result in thyroid dysfunction, a variety of thyroid dysfunction, including autoimmunity issues. It's also very important if you do get diagnosed with hyper or hypothyroid to check to see if you have an autoimmune disease. Western medicine will largely treat it the same. However, it is totally, totally different. It is not, if you have an autoimmune disease, it's not the organ that's being attacked that's really the issue. Yes, it may need to be supported, but it's your body that's attacking that. It's your immune system that's been activated, triggered. Something's going on where it's starting to attack your own body, which is obviously not what is supposed to happen. So we need to look at all of these things. So I think that's a good kind of overview when it comes to the thyroid. So let's get into bloating here. So, one of the questions, and if you've ever had a consult with me, you can probably remember I asked this question. If we talked about bloating and bloating was an issue for you, where is your bloating? Is it up high, like under your rib cage? If it's up high under your rib cage and pretty exclusively and mostly up high, the likelihood that you have SIBO, small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, very, very high. If you have bloating in the lower part of your belly, just in the lower part of your belly, under your belly button, more often we're thinking this could be cortisol related. Usually not, and it could be. More often, though, it's a parasite overgrowth. Now, if you have a full belly bloat and just kind of look like you're pregnant, you probably have one or more gut overgrowth issues, and that may include bacteria, yeast, fungus, and or parasites. All of those could play a role here. So we need to look at all of those things. Now, once again, one important distinction when it comes to gut overgrowth issues, a lot of people are just going to do an antibiotic for a bacteria, an antifungal protocol, do some basic work around parasites. And they might take 2 medications that are very common and very popular out there for parasite work. If you have a pretty low parasite load and overall you're in pretty good health, you may respond well to those. Most people, though, will not. And you can get some crazy side effects, some crazy Herx reactions. Also, if you have any sort of bacteria, yeast, or fungal issues and you do a specific bacteria, yeast, or fungal protocol, the likelihood that all of these issues are going to come back is astronomically high. For many people, it's within a couple months. For most, it's within 6 to 12 months. This is why SIBO in particular is deemed very challenging, quote unquote, challenging to heal or challenging to treat. It's not. SIBO is actually extremely easy to address. Where Western medicine and even many people in the functional medicine space get this wrong is you're not looking at how and why these things got here in the first place. And that can be a complicated answer. I mean, that could be everything from you took a bunch of antibiotics as a kid, you drank a bunch of alcohol in your teens and early 20s. You have been slamming your body with McDonald's and not good quality food for a long time. Might be toxin overload issues. It might be drainage pathway issues. It might be low stomach acid. If you've been on a PPI, you probably have low stomach acid issues, which opens up for a breeding ground of gut overgrowth issues. And there is plenty of science and research done around anti-SIBO protocol, like SIBO type protocols, medication, and herbal. There's also a lot of research around antifungal protocols. Here's the thing you really need to look at, and here's where I get so angry at quote unquote functional medicine doctors, naturopathic doctors who really buy into this. These are all 4 to 8 week studies, most of them being 6 weeks. Okay, cool. Like it's actually not that hard to get rid of. The key here, though, is long-term relief. And long-term, these things are not going away on any sort of just anti-SIBO protocols, antibacterial, antifungal type protocols, a low FODMAP diet, a low candida diet, like antibiotics, herbal protocols, it doesn't matter. They're not effective long term because once again, they are missing this piece. If you have some sort of overgrowth issue, okay, yeah, of course we do need to kill the overgrowth issue, but also how did it get there in the first place? What went wrong with the rest of our body that it started in the first place? And if you don't backtrack and look at that piece of it, I mean, you're going to be off and on bloated forever. And once again, I say that as someone who experienced significant bloating. I had SIBO. The number of SIBO protocols I did, antibiotics and herbal protocols. I mean, good God, have I done so many supplements for those things. Same thing with parasites. Parasites can be tricky to find. I took 5 stool tests. 3 of those were near perfect. I still had SIBO. I still had a parasite issue. I still had bloating. I still had constipation. Big reason why we don't love stool testing in our practice. Doesn't give us the hows and the whys as to why these things are happening in the first place. Blood work is the most accurate way to look at parasites. However, I can tell you if you have toxin overload issues, and we can test for those quite easily. Now we need to be very specific in how we test and what we're looking at. I mean, you have a parasite issue. I mean, I can tell you that 100%. Like, I don't even need to look at your blood work. I can just, if you have mold, mycotoxin issues, if you've got heavy metal issues, if you have environmental toxin issues, I can tell you 100% you have a parasite problem. And that's because parasites love toxins. They feed off of them. And here's the negative feedback loop. If you have toxin overload issues, it's going to feed the parasites. Parasites are going to overgrow. They go through natural life and death cycles, just like everyone else. Those are 7 to 21 day cycles typically. And then when they die, they release those toxins back into the body, which then feed more parasites. So it's a never ending loop. So anytime we do any sort of toxin overload work, we are always doing parasite work. We're also not just doing localized parasite work in the gut. Parasites travel. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when I talk about PCOS. So bloating, that can be a big role. If you have loose stool and or constipation, that can be a huge contributor to bloating. The other thing with bloating is this can be gas related, where your belly, and belly, I mean like your belly, not your stomach. Your stomach is an organ that is on the left side of your body versus your belly, which is in the front of your body. When we think about your gut's technically just your large intestine, but I'm going to include your small intestine here. So small and large intestines, kind of the front of your body. When we've got a lot of these bloating issues, it can be gas related. And so the question is, why? Gut overgrowth issues can explain a lot. I'll also say when you go through killing protocols, when a lot of these things die, they're releasing more gases back into your body. So during a quote unquote healing protocol, you actually may continue to experience that bloating. And that can be a real thing. The other thing, if you have a lot of constipation, a lot of times there's a lot of trapped air within the constipation, within all the stool that's backed up. So it actually may be more uncomfortable when you start trying to like move and push that out versus feeling instant relief. And I've seen that plenty of times, especially with my clients who have really significant chronic constipation. So that's a big piece of this too. Bloating, especially depending on where it is, if it's up higher, if we look at like energetic emotional components here, that's our solar plexus. That can have a lot to do with our identity, like our self-identity. Same thing with our root chakra. It can also have a lot to do with, being grounded in our body. I talked about this with constipation, but being grounded in our body, being grounded into our physical world, our physical body, and our identity. Solar plexus, same thing. Like we can have definitely like, it is the last of our lower chakras that really ground us into our body, into our physical world. I'll also say for a lot of people, it's a lot of people's fear centers. Most of the time when I do energy work, fear is one of the prominent emotions that will come up in the solar plexus. If you have a lot of fears, if you live in a cycle of fear and anxiety, that alone can make you really bloated. And that once again, like that's a hard piece a long piece to address. It's not a simple take a pill, fix your fear. It's you've got to feel into those and heal into those. And there can be a lot of layers to that. So that can play a really big role here. And that's something that we absolutely need to look at when it comes to bloating, would be our solar plexus and our root. I'll also say there's, for people who just swallow a lot of their emotions, it can end up in their bellies. And it's like an overwhelming, it's almost like a pocket of emotion where the belly just starts to fill up with emotions of unprocessed emotions. And as we start to process those emotions, some people will experience shifts in their gut. And sometimes it's not the most comfortable. Sometimes it's a lot of gas. Sometimes it's a lot of movement. There can just be a lot of processing that goes into that. I find castor oil packs over both the liver. I actually have a castor oil pack on right now. Castor oil pack over the liver can help process that, but a castor oil pack over the belly can also help process that, especially if you're processing a lot around that fear. So that is something like to really think about when it comes to bloating issues. And I think I'm going to leave the bloating piece at that. I actually have one other piece that I want to talk about here, and that is food sensitivities. And so people with a lot of food sensitivities can have a lot of bloating, specifically around eating. Now, if you're bloated without eating, if you're bloated just drinking some water, you probably have a gut overgrowth issue, among a couple other things. If you only get bloated around eating, yeah, you probably have some food sensitivities. Gut overgrowth can absolutely play a big role in that. And so can our small intestine. And our small intestine has basically these junctions in it that what happens in our small intestine is basically our food is supposed to be pretty well digested by the time it gets to our small intestine. And within our small intestine, they have like very tight junctions. I think about, and if you're watching this, this is the visual I always get. It's almost like a gate, and it's like interlocking gates that are really tight and only allow nutrients to go through. Now, what can happen for a variety of reasons is those junctions can start to break apart. And when they start to break apart, there becomes gaps in them. And those gaps can allow for maybe some undigested food, maybe some things that are supposed to go into our large intestine that go into waste and supposed to be expelled out of our body. Some of those things can get into our bloodstream. And what happens in it is when these things are released into our bloodstream, our body sees them as foreign attacks, and our immune system starts to attack them. And this is how food sensitivities start. Especially if you eat the same thing every single day and you start to have a lot of food sensitivities, this can play a really big role. And it's not the food issue that itself is also not even just the small intestinal lining, which we absolutely do need to fix. However, if you only fix that, we're missing, once again, how and why did this happen in the first place? And we need to peel back those layers as well. That's a really important part of the process of we need to make sure we tighten those junctions back up. That is always a piece of any sort of gut work that we ever do. That is always a final piece of any sort of gut work that we're doing is we're repopulating. So probiotics, prebiotics, and then we also heal and seal the gut lining, which is really the small intestinal lining. It's not actually the large intestinal lining. It's the small intestine. And that's where things like marshmallow root, L-glutamine, slippery elm, aloe can play a role. And some of that can also help with constipation sometimes. But these kind of soothing herbs, that's where some of these things can come in to help resolve that. The other thing is when these things escape out of our small intestine, they're released into our bloodstream, and that blood is sent to our liver to be filtered. And once again, liver does so many things, including our master filtration system. And then now it has extra work that it has to do. And once again, if the liver is busy doing filtering out excess hormones and trying to convert your thyroid hormones and try to filter out all of these toxins and help regulate your blood sugar and do all these things, can get overwhelmed, in which case that sometimes it needs just a little extra love and a little extra support to do all of the jobs that it's designed to do. And it is also only one organ. It can only keep up with so many things. And after enough damage or things that it has to deal with, it just can't keep up. It's just like any of us. Our little organ, our little liver organ is just like all of us, where at some point we might have a breaking point and we just cannot keep up with everything that is on our plate, in which case we need to ask for help. the liver will ask for help, and we need to ideally give it some help, some love, take some things off of its plate to do so that it can function optimally again. Okay. Last but not least for this one is PCOS. And like I said, there's a lot of correlation to PCOS and how I'm going to peel back these layers and also to other hormone imbalances. So PCOS specifically is polycystic ovarian syndrome. A couple things that often come along with this. We will usually have cysts on our ovaries, polycystic ovarian cystic ovarian syndrome. So we will usually have cysts or fibroids on our ovaries. We will often also have excess androgens and or testosterone, which that's an important piece specific to this. We will also often have some blood sugar regulation issues. Insulin resistance specifically is most common in PCOS. These things are not exclusive to PCOS. And yeah, this is, there's multiple criteria to be officially diagnosed with PCOS. Those are a few of them that will often come along with it. PCOS will often come along with very heavy periods. Sometimes it can be more frequent periods. There can be a lot of symptoms leading up to your periods. And then definitely like during your period, it can be very, very challenging and very painful when it comes to the actual period itself. So when we think about PCOS, I think about periods, PCOS, the number one, if we think like internal body dysfunction issue going on that we see with PCOS, I'm also going to say this is also very common with endometriosis, is a parasite overgrowth. And once again, parasites are not exclusive to our gut. Most people only look at the gut when it comes to parasites, but parasites can take home in our ovaries, in our lungs, in our heart, in our sinuses, in our brain, in our liver, and in other organs. So PCOS, once again, I'm thinking 98% of the cases, and we've worked once again with hundreds of PCOS cases, among other hormone imbalance issues, parasites is always playing a role. And I'll also say that with that being said, once again, and this is where, if you've got a parasite issue, the likelihood that you have a toxin overload issue is also pretty darn high, because that's almost always, if we're going to do parasite work, we've got to start with some basic drainage pathway support work. And that looks like often supporting our liver, our kidneys, making sure that we're having regular bowel movements, maybe doing extra liver support like castor oil packs, dry brushing, rebounding, sauna, Epsom salt baths, and or coffee enemas. So those are all options to support, and almost always in our PCOS clients, specifically when we start doing that drainage pathway support work as our prep work before we do any sort of killing, before we do any sort of like intense binding work, most people have easier periods right off the bat. I mean, within 2 weeks of working together, this is one of the most common things that we will see in our PCOS clients, which is a really big deal. If you've had heavy, painful periods, whether you have PCOS or other hormone issues, man, does it make a big difference when you don't feel like you are dying, when you don't have to take a bunch of Tylenol or Advil during your period, when you can feel like a relatively normal person and not be in excruciating pain. Man, does that go such a long way. Can also help with some of the mental and emotional side of these things and the fluctuations. Oftentimes we'll see if someone's going to still have mood swings, which is very possible, by the way, they're going to be less intense. They're going to be more mild. They're going to be less, like giant waves, and they're going to be a more moderate type of waves that are a little bit easier to ride when it comes to that side of things. And long-term, people should not, well, we should not have those things. Yeah, there can be exceptions here and there if you go through stressful periods of time. Our sex hormones are very sensitive, and we can have a couple weird periods, but they should go back to optimal and where they should be. So that piece is almost always playing a role here. So we need to look at parasites. I'll say like general gut overgrowth issues for sure. We also need to look at the liver pretty intensely from a toxin overload piece. Once again, the liver also plays a really big role in blood sugar regulation. So if we have PCOS and we have insulin resistance, usually the liver is playing a role. We need to look at nutrition. Are you eating in a way to balance your blood sugar? And there's kind of two schools of thoughts when it comes to blood sugar regulation. The first one is eat your fiber, then your protein. For us, we typically do the opposite. We say eat your protein, then eat your fiber. This is mostly anecdotal. There is science to back both, by the way. And I'll tell you, with our clients specifically, and once again, we have thousands of case studies here, I will tell you that almost all of our women do better eating protein than veggies, than other carbohydrates. And there should be fats kind of mixed into all of those here. So we will often start by recommending, all right, let's add in some protein. Let's make sure we are getting protein at your meals because that is extremely regulating for your blood sugar. Let's make sure we're eating breakfast and a high protein, higher fat breakfast. Not saying you can't have carbs at breakfast. You absolutely can. And higher protein, higher fat is not only going to stabilize your blood sugar for that meal, it's also going to set your blood sugar up to be more stable for the entire rest of the day. And we know that very, very concretely. So that plays a really big role. So we need to make sure that we are regulating blood sugar. Oftentimes, we do not need supplementation. I know a lot of women, especially with PCOS, will take berberine. Yeah, that can be helpful. And I can also tell you that, yeah, you can spend money on a supplement. It's also a new study that just came out here that took a look at berberine supplements, and man, are most of them pretty garbage. I rather start with nutrition personally, and that's often what we'll look at. Now, if someone's having really extreme blood sugar dysregulation issues, we're going to recommend something that is a combo product that helps stabilize blood sugar. And there's a few of them out there. We're often never going to recommend just straight berberine. We're going to recommend a combination of a variety of nutrients that may or may not include berberine to help overall stabilize blood sugar. This is also a big reason why metformin is largely prescribed in individuals who have PCOS. I find long term that most people with PCOS, after doing bigger, deeper work, almost everyone can wean off of it pretty darn easily without any major issues, if that is of interest to the individual. It is always an individual choice. So that can play a really big role. The liver overall plays a really big role here because anytime we have any sort of excess hormones of any sort, it almost goes along with our digestion. So it's like, are we getting enough of the thing? Are we eating enough of the thing? Two, are we digesting it and being able to absorb it? It's almost the same thing. Like, is our body producing too much of it? Or it can be both. Or are we not metabolizing and getting out the excess that our body doesn't need out? And that second question, the answer to that second question largely comes down to the liver. Once again, the liver is our master filtration organ. Yes, there are other things that play a role here, our lymphatic system, our kidneys, and a variety of other things. Our sweating plays a big role here. But the liver plays a really, really big role when it comes to this. And if the liver is not supported, if the liver has too many jobs, if we have a very high toxin load, if you have mycotoxins, mycotoxin illness, if you have mold toxicity, this is like the ultimate stressor on the body and everything else that comes along with it. We have to look at that and we have to support that. And once again, for most of our PCOS clients, when we start some basic drainage pathway support work, they feel a difference right away. I mean, within their next cycle, they're feeling the difference and they're feeling less pain, less inflammation. Their periods probably aren't as heavy. These are almost, I never make guarantees to clients. And that is something that I feel pretty confident, almost guaranteed, where I can almost guarantee because it's almost 100% of our clients with PCOS issues see this within weeks of starting to work with us while we're working on the bigger issues. So the next question is, okay, so if we're not filtering out, then maybe why is your body producing excess testosterone, excess androgens? Well, there can be physical reasons, and more often than not, I see the energetic reasons playing a bigger role here. And this is where I'm sure most people hardcore into the science only will disagree with me. And I've got hundreds of case studies where I've always seen this. I mean, I'm talking this is, once again, this goes back to the thyroid, where 100% of the time I've seen the emotional and energetic component of holding things down, of not speaking up for yourself, of people-pleasing patterns with excess testosterone and excess androgen production. And once again, that's not the case for everyone. Sometimes it's just a metabolism pushing it out, filtering it out type issue. But for anyone who it is too high of a production issue, at least in part, you are too in your masculine energy. And especially as a woman, I think an important thing we need to understand is, and this goes back to, and this also applies to the nervous system, where both are good. Being in our masculine energy, good, has value. Being in our feminine energy is good, and it has value. The issue comes into play is when we get stuck in one or the other, and or in unhealthy patterns of either or both. So if we think about testosterone and androgens, once again, if it's an actual production issue, I've never not seen a case where a woman isn't too in their hyper masculine, whether that is like healed or unhealed. And sometimes it's more often a combination of both, where we're doing all the time. We have a hard time resting, big on lists. We're not very good at resting. We're not good. We want to do everything logically and don't trust flow or intuition. Maybe we don't feel creative. And I say this from personal experience. I'm like, I used to not be a creative person. Now I'm like, oh, I'm a total right brain person, like 100%. And I always have been. If I look back, I just suppressed that side of myself because it didn't help me survive when I needed it for the majority of my life. So these are things that we have to think about. If someone's always in their hypermasculine state, I get it. You probably did that consciously or unconsciously, and usually it's unconsciously because you needed it to survive, which is totally understandable. And as we grow up and come out of that survival state, our body doesn't always know that. Our brains may consciously know that. Our subconscious may not understand that. And our bodies definitely may not understand that. And so we have to teach it, hey, we can embody both energies. And the goal is really, the ultimate goal is to be able to flow pretty easily between those two and take advantage of the strengths of both, because both are highly valuable when used appropriately. And then once again, it's being able to flow in between us, just like our nervous system. A regulated nervous system is not about always being relaxed, not being stressed, not having negative thoughts, not feeling stressed. It's not about any of those things. It's not getting stuck in a chronic state of stress and just being in that hypervigilant mode where we get stuck in a fight, flight, freeze, fawn kind of response. But we're able to utilize those and flow between the stress and not stressed, because both have a lot of value. And if we get stuck, that's where the issues really come into play here. And we should be able to flow back and forth between those two. That is not exclusive to just PCOS. That is common in many, many, many women, and definitely with PCOS when there is a production issue, if we are overproducing testosterone and or androgens. The other side, which is this is really across the board with women and sex hormone imbalances. Once again, this is super, 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 super common. And once again, definitely this played a role in my own hormone issues. So if we think about hormones, if we think about our reproductive system, that's going to be in like just below our belly button is where a lot of those organs and right around our belly button, kind of like in the mid to lower part of our belly, is where a lot of our reproductive organs is. Also why women, a lot of times, unless you're super, super lean, you're going to have just like a tiny little bump in that lower part of your belly. It may not be fat. I mean, you can be quite lean and still have that. we have extra organs. We've got extra parts there. All of our sex organs are inside of our body. We don't have external parts like men do, or the similar like men do. Obviously, we have external stimulation and sensitivity pieces of our body, but our organs are in this lower part of our belly. And so that little baby bump that happens, and once again, even with the leanest of women, that's just your organs. That's not fat. That's not necessarily just like something to get rid of. Like that is where our sex organs are. And we're supposed to have that little bump within our body. We're also supposed to have higher body fat percentages than men. It is healthy for us to have that. Now, there are unhealthy body fat percentages. Of course, there's unhealthy amounts of body fat, belly fat. We can definitely, if you have cortisol dysregulation issues, you can hold extra in that lower part of your belly, and that can definitely be a thing. But if you are pretty lean and you're like, I just have this little bump in the lower part of my belly, which I hear a lot from a lot of women, that's a protection for your organs. And that's just your organs being there. So just keep that in mind. But this is where our sex organs are. So if we think about the energetic body, okay, well, what's right there? Our sacral chakra. So our sacral chakra has a lot to do with this masculine, feminine energies, and especially healed versus unhealed. So I need to look at those, and you can have unhealed masculine wounds, unhealed feminine wounds, mother wounds, father wounds. And a big piece of this is also sexual trauma. And sexual trauma can be obvious: sexual assault, rape, unwanted sexual advances, different things like that. And there can also be some less obvious kind of signs and symptoms of this. And I see both. I fall into both categories. I've experienced a legitimate sexual trauma, from the obvious standpoint. And I've also experienced some from a less obvious standpoint. And so when we look at this, we also need to look at sexual trauma. What have your sexual experiences been? What was your first sexual experience been? Did you have a sexual experience where you wanted to say no and didn't feel like you could? Where you didn't want to have sex, but you almost felt obligated? Maybe not like explicitly forced, but there was an internal, I do not want to do this, and you feel forced, you feel obligated to do this. Did you have sex too soon, too young, too soon in different relationships? Do you feel comfortable with your own body and your own sexuality? Do you know what feels good for you? Are you afraid to explore that? If you're in a relationship of any sort that involves sex, does your partner know how to please you? Do you feel comfortable expressing your sexual interests, desires, what you enjoy to your partner? All of those things play a big role here. And once again, so we can think of like the more obvious sexual trauma, sexual assault, rape, different things like that. And those are not the only types of sexual trauma. And for me, it almost looks like, capital T trauma in childhood: abusive parent, physically, emotionally abusive, obviously sexual abuse, having an addict as a parent, having an absent parent, different things like that, versus lowercase t trauma. Well, did you feel like an outsider from your family your whole life? Even if they loved you, even if they, explicitly told you that they loved you and tried to include you, did you feel like an outsider? That's a lowercase t trauma. That is still very much a trauma from your childhood. Same thing with sexual trauma. And I know a lot of women have a lot of issues in this area. And this is a really important thing to dig into. Once again, I get it. I totally understand. And hormones can play a big role. It's also vice versa. Like if your hormones are low, you may not feel like having sex, but it's also, is there a lot of trauma in there that is then contributing to your hormone issues? Then you don't feel like having sex. It can be all of it. It can be both. So there's always that piece that, we may not start there initially, especially if someone works with us. And it is always in the back of our minds. And once there's a level of trust and peeling back some of the maybe surface level layers, we're always going to dig into this, ask about it. And not everyone, once again, like not everyone feels comfortable with it. And that's totally fine. That is totally your choice. It is your body. We do not have to dig into anything you do not want to dig into. And I can tell you from personal experience, that is not something I wanted to dig into for a long time. And man, has it been worthwhile. And I'm still, it's never like, I healed it, it's done. It's, it comes back around in different layers to continue to be healed. And I have done a lot of work in that arena. And being in the relationship that I'm in now, where this is arguably the first very healing, I don't want to say healed, but healing type relationship I've been in, this was a big topic for us that I needed. Before we got together, I shared a lot of my own personal experiences around this because it has shaped my sexual experiences for my entire life. And, I think it is still something that we continue to have a lot of conversations about. And I still continue to be surprised in different ways that this shows up in my own life. And I have awareness around this and I continue to work through it, sometimes more explicitly than others. And I think it's just an important thing that we all talk about. And I know some people get really iffy when talking about this stuff. And I know I've had multiple clients be like, hey, I don't want to TMI you. And I go, yeah, it's almost impossible to TMI me. I am here to hold space. I can hold space for just about anything and everything. It's something, once again, it's one of our strong skill sets that not only myself, but also within the practice, any of our practitioners can hold space for any of these types of things and any of these types of conversations. So just something to think about when it comes to this. So I think that's where I'm going to wrap up with this episode. Like I said in the first one, if you want me to I might do these more sporadically, but if there are symptoms that you would like me to start peeling back the layers and talk a little bit more through and all the different sides that we may want to look at these issues, send us an email, comment on the podcast itself, comment on any other videos on our social media pages, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, any of those things, and we will put them on our list for a future episode. Thank you for listening. As always, please like, subscribe, follow if it resonates. 5-star reviews really, really, really mean the world to us. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.